Well, that only took a minute. Did you realize how long a minute was? I appreciate Austin doing that because it really does begin to fixate just how long a minute is. Give me a minute. How many times have we said something like that? Just give me a minute. A minute takes a long, long time. 60 seconds. When you don't do anything, don't say anything, don't see anything because your eyes are closed. You're cognizant. So I closed my eyes, as Austin told us, to think, and I was impressed by the quiet. And a minute is a long time. But I would imagine that after about 40 seconds, you began to start thinking of other things. Human mind. It's kind of an interesting arrangement. But we do take time each and every first day of the week to think back to what it was that Christ did for us. And we do all of that because we long for something better. Because Christ died for us, we are so much the better off. His grace reaches me is a powerful song. Last Sunday afternoon, following the assembly, little Isaiah came up here, and he was standing right here, and he had his songs ready to sing. He had written them out on his paper and indiscernible, but he knew what he wanted. When I came up to turn off my phone, he looked at me with terror in his eyes. Like, no, don't tell me to get away. And I said, no, Isaiah, you stay there. I just want to turn my phone off. And then I pulled the little stool over, stood him up on it, held him in place, and he led singing. The look on his face was precious. But what was even better was the look on Jacob's face. To see his son up there. And the song he tried to lead, as little as he is, 3 years old, his grace reaches me. When we can begin to teach our children of the importance of grace, of mercy, of love, those minutes that we take with them are precious indeed. Solomon would write in Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, that seed remains in place. And kind of as you drove in the last couple of times, you've noticed we've got a veritable bounty of grass popping up through the rocks. And so we'll go out, we'll spray something on them, kill it back. But what it tells you is that seed is there and it's dormant. And it just takes a little bit to bring it back to life. And so that's what we think when we begin to realize about the importance of 1 minute, and the teaching therein. A seed is planted, and a seed that will come to fruition. Well, I want you to turn in your Bibles into the book of 1 Corinthians. And we're going to be in the 15th chapter. And it's a chapter we're well familiar with. Nothing earth-shattering coming new or innovative out of it. But in 15, Paul talks about the resurrection and points to the resurrection. But in verse 58, it's passage you're here all the time. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. Now, I don't know how many times I've heard this quoted. A couple of years ago when we were putting a focus on personal evangelism, it was used a lot. And we were challenged. Go out and do the various things that need to be done, as well we should. But I was asked to put together a sermon on this verse and to deal with it during a series I'm going to be presenting later on this month at a congregation not here. And I was asked to. And I thought, they probably want the standard tried and true. But I looked at the verse again. I said, aha, there's something here more than meets the eye. A whole lot more than meets the eye. So look at some key words. Look at the word therefore. Therefore carries with it the idea. To that end, consequently, for that reason. So everything that he's talked about, one would argue in the 15th chapter. But I think you could go back even further. You could go back to chapter 1, where he talks about division. Shouldn't be any division of the body. Chapter 2, where he talks about inspiration, and so on and so forth. I think it all comes down to this. Therefore, consequently, because of, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do 3 things specifically. And what are those 3 things? I want you to be steadfast. The word steadfast, firm in belief, resolute, fixed in place, sense of loyalty. I want you to have that. Any of you that know me well know that tried and true, I'm a Dodger fan through and through. I do not bleed Dodger blue, but if it were possible, I probably would. I'm loyal to them, no matter what. I follow them. My loyalty to the Portland Trail Blazers was short-lived. When I could get free tickets, I liked them. When the free tickets ran out, maybe not so much. Steadfast, immovable. Immovable is unyielding, incapable of being moved. Now, I know several of you played football in high school and or in college. And one of the things that the coaches tried to teach was immovability. You don't get blown off the line. You stand resolute. You're immovable. Well, that's what we need to be spiritually. Unyielding, incapable of being moved. He's talking about in regards to those things pertaining to our relationship with Christ. Lastly, the one that most people focus on, abounding. Fine and well, we should be. But we should also be firm in our belief, resolute, unyielding, immovable, and abounding in the work of the Lord. Look at the word abounding. You can see it on the overhead. Abounding, existing or providing a great or plentiful supply. So that's what I've got to do. I've got to provide a plentiful supply of effort, while at the same time, I remain immovable, firm in belief, and resolute. And I'm abounding in the work of the Lord. Now, also notice in verse 58, always carries with it that at all times, in all circumstances, that it never fails. It is not spasmodic. It's, we were watching a movie yesterday, and the first thing that was brought out was, wow, it is stop and start. There were spasmodic segments in it. And it was because it was coming via the internet. And there was a problem with buffering. And so you'd sit there and the character would freeze in mid-punch or whatever. It was one of the monster dinosaur movies. And so the dinosaur would be about ready to, and he'd get lockjaw and it'd be frozen. And you're going, well, come on, go ahead, bite. You get a little bit frustrated. Abounding is not spasmodic. It means that there is a continuum. It is what we do constantly, not highs and lows, as we sometimes want to think about. but we hold on to that and we build. We need to be overflowing in all that we do for the cause of Christ. Now, why do we do this? Why is this verse so important? It's because what Paul calls upon the Corinthians do because of what he said in verse 10, same chapter. So go back into verse 10, same chapter. Notice what he says. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. I didn't realize Paul quoted Popeye here. I am what I am. That's what Paul's saying. By the grace of God, I am what I am. What are you? Well, I am a Christian. And that's what I am. And because of that, everything in my life is determined. As a result, I am unyielding. I am overflowing in the work for the cause of Christ because I am steadfast and I am abounding. And I know that the work that I do will not be futile. It will not come back empty. It will not be made void. It has a purpose. It has a reason. And so that's why that word always is so very, very vital. And why we need to remember who we are. I know you probably hadn't thought about verse 10 before. I had read it many times, just kind of skimmed through it, and never realized really the importance of what Paul's saying. By the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace toward me did not prove vain, but I labored even more than all of them. Yet not I, but the grace of God with me. Remember I started out talking about what little Isaiah did with the song? His grace reaches me. Yes, his grace reaches me. How beautiful that is. So Paul says that because of God's grace, because of that fact, how wondrous it is that I can be steadfast. I can be immovable. I can be abounding. And I can be that always because of the love that God has for me. And reciprocally, my love back to him. Why? Because I am what I am. I am what I am. And I do the things that I do spiritually because who I am in Christ. And that's what I do. So that verse takes on new meaning to me. Verse 10, and especially verse 58. That verse 10 is such a motivator. The more I look at it, the more I think of it, the more it motivates me. Adam and Linda were working on a joint project together. And it was a project that's a model, a puzzle combined. And hundreds and hundreds of little cogs and gears. And what it does after it's completed is it is a working model mechanism. And it's kind of impressive when you look at it. They did it without any screws, without any nails, without any glue. It's done. And they were motivated. They did a couple things wrong. They went back in and said, we got to go back here. Why were they so motivated? I would have said, do it for me, please. But they didn't. They sat and they said, well, what did we do wrong? Well, we got to go back and undo all of this. Oh, no. That's what I would have said. Oh, no. Somebody do it for me, please. I'm proud of them that they were motivated. They got back in, tore out segments again, put it back together. And now it sits on the mantle in the living room. A testament to motivation. And if necessary, being motivated to get it right enough to go back and undo what was done in order to get it right. That's what we're talking about when we come to the realization of I am who I am. And that God's grace has been extended. And because of who I am, I want to be the best who I am in relationship to the God of heaven. So I am motivated because of that relationship. So that when I get to 1558, I can be steadfast. I can be immovable. And yes, it is a logical conclusion of all that you've said and of who I am in relation to Christ. Therefore, I can do this. And I can be abounding always in the work of the Lord. Always. Doesn't become so hard then, does it? It becomes a byproduct of who you are. If you're all right being a child of God. See, because some people aren't. Some people really struggle with being a Christian. Oh, externally, they want to say, I'm a Christian. They like that. But then other times, no. They have some identity issues. Galatians 2 and verse 20. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. See, the key thing is accepting who you are. Accepting it and realizing that there is work for you to do. And that work for the cause of Christ has absolutely tremendous value. But in order, excuse me, but in order for it to be done, not COVID, I've tested myself, I've had it. I've had COVID. I've gotten every shot conceivable. I've been boosted, and boosted again. So it ain't COVID, it's just dry throat. Or I'm allergic to y'all, I don't know which. Take whichever one. But suffice it to say, what it's going to demand is that we be willing to give ourselves as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is our spiritual service. And not being conformed to the world, but being transformed by the renewing of our mind. That's the key. In order to get and really appreciate and apply 1 Corinthians 15:58, you've got to get to the mindset of being a steward in every respect. The realm of stewardship. It has meaning. It has value in every conceivable way. There is meaning and value in what you do. It is not an exercise in futility. Because when we begin to look at the work that can be done, it is more diversified than simply going out, oh, hello, good day. I'm from the Winnetka Avenue Church of Christ, and I'm here to, bam, and the door gets slammed in your face. Excuse me. Aha. Ah. Amazing thing, water. But it's more than that. It's more than thinking that that's what you got to do. Because there's a lot of other work that some of us are more adapted toward. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to figure out what it is I can do. And there's a lot you can do. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. But it demands conversion. It demands a renewal of the mind, transformation. And when I really, truly devote myself to Christ, it is going to mean something truly different. And the problem we are faced with is that there are many that are churched, but there are very few that are converted. And it's not up for me to say which one is you. I look at myself and go, am I really converted? Have I been churched and that's it? And has it just become part of my life? Has it become my social aspect? Or am I really converted? Is my personality changed? Is my lifestyle changed? Is my manner of life changed? Are my priorities changed? Or only they changed on, well, times of meeting, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Wednesday night, whatever. Have I really been converted, or have I only been churched? And there is a monumental difference between the two. You have to recognize also that when Paul's talking in Romans 12, he's talking about service. He's talking about being blended together. It's the same thing that he talked about over in Ephesians, the 4th chapter. And that's one we'll take some time and look at real quickly. I would say in a minute, but we all know how long a minute is. So we'll just suffice to say quickly. Ephesians 4, verse 14, beginning. Paul writes, as a result, another way to be said, therefore, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves, carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. What he just said there is, be steadfast, immovable. Therefore, be steadfast, be immovable. Then in verse 15, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ. In other words, I am that I am. I'm in a relationship with him. Go on a little bit further. Look at verse 16. From whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by that which every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. Because I am who I am, because I have been converted, I want to blend in with members of the body. I want to do my part. Think back to that model puzzle that I mentioned about Linda and Adam doing. When they got it, came in a box. Not a big box. But when it came in with sheets of wood about that size, maybe a little bit smaller. About, an eighth of an inch thick. And there was all of them contained individual pieces. They had to go in and punch them out, each one. Hundreds of them, as I said. And each one played a role. And unless each one was fitted into place, that puzzle model would not work. When they got it finished, after they had to undo it and do it again, Linda brought it in and set it on my desk in my office. And she said, here, look what it does. She turned the crank and it worked perfectly. Turning the crank, everything worked. The ball went down the chute. Another ball went up, came down. Follow it. There's perpetual motion because each part did what it was called upon to do. And some of the parts were infinitesimally small. Some were bigger. But each one had a part. Same thing in the body of Christ. Same thing with regards to this congregation. Each one has a part to play, a role to fill in order for us to find the growth that we want. And not all of us are fit to go out knocking on doors. Not all of us are there. And that's not a bad thing, because there's other things that we can do. See, in Colossians, the 2nd chapter and verse 2, as well as down in verse 19, Paul writes to the brethren there, he said, you're knit together. Knitting's kind of a fascinating thing to watch. Do I want to do it? No. But I marvel at people that do it and or crochet or whatever. Because what they're doing is they're knotting things together. We're knit together. We become one part of a whole. And going on a little bit further, Paul said in verse 19 that we begin working together in order to bring about that growth. Well, that's all that's implied there in Romans, the 12th chapter, verses 1 and 2. But now go back into Romans, the 12th chapter. And you can see on the overhead, we're going to be talking about verses 3 and 4. Because in verses 3 and 4, he begins talking about all the members. So watch what he does. For through the grace given to me, I say to every man among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think. Well, we shouldn't be big-headed about ourselves. But to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. So, at the very basis of this sound judgment is to realize that you're not the end-all and be-all of everything. You are but a part that works together. And I recognize as the minister, for whatever reason, I wish you wouldn't do it, for whatever reason, people put ministers up here or sometimes down here. Don't do either one. Just accept the fact that there are people and that we're all joined together and each one's doing their job. It is so much easier to preach to 3,000 people than it is to preach to 3. I want you to know that. I have spoken before 3,000 people before. That was easy. When I gave a funeral for a woman in Las Vegas and there were only 3 people present, that was hard. That was hard. So if nothing else, you can be present for classes and for services in person. That's great. That's great. That's not all you're going to do, but that's a start. And see, somebody's phone agrees with me on that one. Somebody's calling in from YouTube. Yeah, brother, go on, preach more, which is fine. But we all have a specific role that we can do. We can all do something, but it starts with humility of mind and the realization that we all don't have the same ability. I cannot lead singing. I can't. I appreciate those that do. I truly do. And when we have to rely on me to lead singing, whoa, I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding. We don't all have the same abilities. But we do share the responsibility of stewardship equally. We all have that same realm. And Paul in verse 7 begins talking about the various services of worship and stewardship being set forth. Our time is up this morning. So if you will grant me the indulgence, I'm not going to go over my time, but I will come back at 2:30 and we'll finish it up at 2:30. For those of you that won't be back, please know that, and I would that you would be back, but for whatever reason, it will be made available on YouTube. And you can watch it live or later on. What we're doing with things on YouTube is we're going back and editing them all. So after something is on live, after a few days or a length of time, it is then edited. And the singing is being taken out. Everything is being taken out except for the sermon, and then will be reposted. That's the key of what we're about, is the message of Jesus Christ and him crucified and how it applies to us. So the second part, saying all that, will be made available to you. And if you can't find it anywhere, there's contact information at the end of our meeting today. You can write me or email me. I'll be glad to make sure you somehow or another get the second part of this. Because the second part is the application. And I think it's probably the most important part. But the lesson is yours this morning. And every time we do open the Word of God, we realize that there might be somebody that might be subject to the invitation. Now, in the lesson this morning, we were talking about those that have already put on Christ in the waters of baptism. But maybe you know what you need to do. Maybe you've heard about the necessity for baptism for remission of sins. And you realize today is the day of salvation. Everything is ready for you to make that obedience complete. Or perhaps you've already done that, but you need the prayers of the congregation for strength and or encouragement. We invite you to come to make those requests known.